All right, so in this video, we're going to take a look at the Cherokees and how they were removed from Georgia. So remember, much like the Mississippians and the Creeks, the Cherokees also were stationed here in Georgia, and they were scattered throughout the northwest part of Georgia, specifically. So they were removed from Georgia, much like the Creeks. But they were removed a little differently. So their factors that led to their removal were different, at least. So let's start off by looking at one of the biggest events that led to their removal. So this man here, his name is Samuel Worcester. And Samuel Worcester was a missionary. So remember, a missionary is somebody that goes around and spreads the gospel. So he was going around and spreading the gospel within the Cherokee Nation. So he would live there many times. He was there, but he was also arrested by the U.S. government, by the government, several times for living there. So after getting arrested multiple times, he ended up suing the government. So in this case, Worcester versus Georgia, it was basically ruled by John Marshall that, and we'll talk about him later on, that the Cherokees were their own independent nation. They were basically their own little tribe. They had their own little world, and they were not subject to Georgia laws, although they were living on Georgia territory. So this man, John Ross, he was the chief of the Cherokees. So much like McIntosh, who we talked about with the Creek Indian chief, he was also mixed, but they differed. They differed because McIntosh felt like the Indians should be more like the white Americans, whereas John Ross was actually felt the opposite. But he did have some kind of faith in the U.S. government, so much faith in them that he felt like they were going to uphold the ruling of Worcester versus Georgia, and he felt like they were going to leave the Cherokees alone. They weren't going to bother them, but unfortunately, that didn't happen. The U.S. government still ended up making the Cherokees leave Georgia in 1838. Now, John Ross did negotiate for many years with the U.S. government to at least try to get them to uphold their ruling of the case, but they didn't really care. They didn't want to hear it. They wanted the land, and they wanted the Cherokees gone. So the least he got out of it was he asked for the government to pay for his moving expenses. So John Ross and his wife did end up walking on what's known as the Trail of Tears, who we'll talk about later on. And his wife did end up dying on the trail due to exposure to diseases. So the Trail of Tears, where they end up making the Cherokees move to or live at, it ended in modern day Oklahoma. So John Ross survived the trail, and he ended up actually still remaining the Cherokee chief in Oklahoma until he died. So another event that led to the removal of the Cherokees was the Dahlonega Gold Rush. And Dahlonega, Georgia is located in the Blue Ridge region. So legend has it that a little boy was playing along a water spring, and he found a gold nugget. And word got around that boy found that gold nugget. And all people from around the country swarmed to Dahlonega to find gold. Now, we don't know how true it is or not, but that is what legend says. But needless to say, there was very much gold in Dahlonega at this time. So, because of that, many people from around the world, especially in Georgia, were running up to North Georgia to get a piece of the gold action. Because, gold, of course, gold brings money. So there was actually so much gold that about $1.5 million in gold coins was coined during this time. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what does this have to do with the Cherokees? Well, remember, Cherokees are living in this part of Georgia, especially specifically northwest Georgia, and these Americans, or these white Americans specifically, didn't want the Indians in their way, nor did they want them anywhere near this gold. So they were very much pushing for the Indians to the Cherokee to be removed. So, which is how this led to at least one of the reasons that led to their removal. So, if you're looking at that picture below, you'll see some gold nuggets, and you can pause this video right here if you want to look at it. And you also see a picture depiction of Americans looking for gold. Now let's go back to the Worcester versus Georgia case for a minute. So remember the ruling that the Cherokees were their own independent nation, basically like their own little group, their own little tribe, and they didn't have to follow Georgia laws. That ruling came from this man here, John Marshall. Now, this man, unfortunately, Andrew Jackson, when John Marshall gave that ruling and to pretty much saying leave the Cherokees alone, he didn't care. He was actually on record saying that John Ross had made his ruling, now let him enforce it. So, in other words, and he didn't care what John Marshall said, excuse me. So, Andrew Jackson ended up signing what's known as the Indian Removal Act. And that act pretty much said that was the start of the removal of the Cherokees and other Indian groups to modern day Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. Now to the actual Trail of Tears that I've been saying throughout this whole video. So it's called the Trail of Tears because many the Indians were forced to walk this trail to what's known as again modern day Oklahoma. So although Andrew Jackson started the process of the Trail of Tears by signing the Indian Removal Act, President Martin Van Buren, excuse me, who was the president after Jackson, was the one that actually sent the troops in to forcibly make the move. So, and when I say forcibly sent the troops in, like he in the middle of the night, the American troops were down here in Georgia in Cherokee houses and whatnot, and with guns and whatnot, and said, "Basically, pretty much, you got to go." They had no choice. So, about 16,000 Cherokees, men, women, and children, were forced to walk the Trail of Tears. Of that 16,000, 4,000 of them died due to exposure to diseases, starvation, dehydration, you name it, they experienced it. And about 400 of them were actually able to escape the Trail of Tears. So here's a picture of the federal troops coming in and forcibly making the Cherokees leave. And this is the routes, the Trail of Tears, which they took. And here, this is another image that's depicting the Trail of Tears. All right, so I'm going to stop right here.